God, I pray that you would help us to understand your word now. Pray for clarity, wisdom. Pray that you would be glorified, God. Amen. So we're in Matthew chapter 11, verses 7 to 24. We've got quite a big chunk to get through today. And the title of today's message is, Don't Be Flimsy. Don't be flimsy. If you don't know what flimsy is like, ooh. Don't be flimsy. Okay, now, after 2,000 years of the church, the kingdom growing, the church coming to Britain and seriously changing the shape of this country, we now got to the stage where a lot of people in Britain don't want to accept Jesus and they reject Jesus. And what's happening at the moment is that churches are now saying, what are we going to do? People are rejecting Jesus and people are trying to come up with new ways to bring people into church or to bring people to Jesus. And some of that has involved dropping the jargon that people get used to, you know, where people say, hey brother, I think the Lord wants to use your wife. And he's like, use her? What do you mean use her? You know, because that's Christian jargon, isn't it? We say God wants to use you. Use is normally something that means you're going to manipulate someone. Or people say, you need to get committed. You know, and that means go in a mental hospital when someone gets committed. So a lot of Christians have dropped this jargon to try and make the message more accessible to people out there on the street. And then other people have done stuff like we do Christian rap as a way to get the message out there on the street. And there's, you know, people use more modern worship music in their services and stuff. You know, our worship music is R&B style. And there's lots of things people have tried. And we're cool with that here at this church. We're cool with that. We're cool with finding new methods to get the gospel out. You know, this hand is holding our methods. We haven't got a clenched fist on it. We're happy to change those methods every now and then, you know. When we were doing hip-hop a lot of the time, we found that youth were coming and then we do a Bible study with them after we'd done the music. And after a while, we found the youth were bored of the music but weren't bored of the Bible study. So then we stopped doing the hip-hop because this hand isn't a closed story. We say, okay, we don't need to do hip-hop right now. Just Bible studies now. You know, so that we can play with. But the message in this hand, the gospel message about Jesus coming and dying on the cross and being risen again, that we don't mess with. But what's happening at the moment is a lot of churches are saying, you know what, this message ain't right, let's open that as well. And then we just have a whole crazy juggling act. Question is, what would Jesus say about this? What would he say? I mean, in Matthew chapter 11, Jesus is at the stage in his ministry where people are rejecting him. He's not like this super popular guy. People are rejecting him. His mate John the Baptist, his forerunner, the guy who announces him, is in prison. Herod Antipas has put him in prison. And so you could imagine Christians of today saying, Jesus, you want to tone down your message a bit, yeah? You know, what you're doing ain't working. So I've got some tips. I've got a book, yeah, which will give you nice, easy stages, how to get people into your church, Jesus. It's a great book. It's not too offensive, and I'll give it to you, and you can read it. You know, or they might say to John the Baptist, John, right? You're an interesting guy, yeah, and I think you've got some good things to say, but you need to be in people's houses. You need to be in the pubs and the clubs and just mingle with the people, you know, because they're not really feeling you at the moment because you're out there in the desert, and people aren't in the desert. That's why it's called the desert, you know, so you need to be more around people. Now, what would Jesus say to these responses? What would he say? I think I know what he'd say because it's kind of in Matthew chapter 11, right here. What we're going to see is in Matthew's classic way, he's always interested in how people respond. In Matthew chapter 11, he's written a whole bit about how people respond to John the Baptist, how they respond to Jesus, and he also writes about Jesus' approach to ministry, John the Baptist's approach to ministry, and what Jesus thinks about the way people respond to these approaches to ministry that Jesus and John take. Because Jesus and John are different styles. Remember, I'm saying this hand we can move a bit, but their message was the same. We're not messing with that. So let's have a look, see what Jesus' answer is to this problem we find ourselves in today in Britain. Open your Bibles to Matthew 11, verse 7. While they were going away, Jesus began to speak to the crowd about John. What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? What did you go out to see? A man dressed in fancy clothes? Look, those who wear fancy clothes are in the homes of kings. What did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, look, I'm sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you. I tell you the truth, among those born of women, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist. Yet the one who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he is. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has suffered violence, and forceful people lay hold of it. I'm going to read that out again in the NIV. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven is forcefully advancing, and violent men lay hold of it. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John appeared. And if you are willing to accept it, he is Elijah, who is to come. The one who has ears had better listen. To what shall I compare this generation? They are like children sitting in the marketplaces who call out to one another, we played the flute for you, yet you did not dance. We wailed in mourning, yet you did not weep. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say, he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look at him, a glutton and a drunk, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. Then Jesus began to criticize openly the cities in which he had done many of his miracles, because they did not repent. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! If the miracles done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, it will be more bearable for Tyre and Sidon on the day of judgment than for you. And you, Capernaum, will you be exalted to heaven? No, you will be thrown down to Hades. For if the miracles done among you had been done in Sodom, it would have continued to this day. But I tell you, it will be more bearable for the region of Sodom on the day of judgment than for you. So we've got a lot there. Let's break it down. Verse 7. While they were going away, Jesus began to speak to the crowd about John. What did you go into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? Now, the first part of this question could almost be seen as Jesus saying, why did you lot bother going into the wilderness? What made you leave here and go off into the wilderness? What was it? What made it worth the trip? What this shows us here is that God, because Jesus is God, God knows how to draw people into the wilderness. God knows how people think, and he knows how to pull a crowd and say, I'm going to put something in the wilderness that is going to draw people out and move out there into the wilderness. So in other words, he knows how to draw a crowd. And we know John the Baptist wore camel's hair and a leather belt and ate locusts and honey. God knows how to draw a crowd, yeah? And we'll see why in a minute. And Jesus is saying, did you go into the desert to see a reed shaken about by the wind? Now just picture a skinny reed being shaken about by the wind. An everyday occurrence out there, right? An everyday occurrence. So Jesus is saying, did you go all the way out into the desert to see an everyday occurrence of a reed being shaken by the wind? Now, would people bother going into the desert to see an everyday occurrence? If you said to me, oi, do you want to come to the Lake District with me and see a bus? I'd be like, bruv, I live in London, I see a bus every day. I'm not going to bother going to the Lake District to see a bus, okay? So, no, people don't go to see an everyday occurrence. And here the everyday occurrence is a reed shaken by the wind, and this probably symbolizes someone who follows the crowd. Someone who does whatever the crowd tells them to do. Someone who's influenced by the crowd. The wind blows it that way, it goes that way. Wind blows it that way, it goes that way. Pliable. You know, there's a character in Pilgrim's Progress called Pliable. You know, there are people like that. Pliable people. Flimsy people. Floppy people. people who are just influenced. Now, controlled by popular opinion. There was in fact a coin in those times of Herod, King Herod Antipas, who's the guy who's put John the Baptist in prison, right? There was a coin with Herod holding a reed. Now, I don't know, but it's quite possible that Jesus is making an allusion to that as well. Did you go to see someone that the king can just control? A reed shaken about in the wind that Herod controls? And we know John wasn't influenced by the crowd, and we definitely know he wasn't influenced by Herod. So it fits it quite well. He got locked up by the king. So what we see here is that God drew a crowd with someone who wasn't influenced by the crowd. He drew a crowd with someone who wasn't influenced by the crowd. The application is, are you influenced by the crowd? Do you say things just because other people say them around you? And that applies to doctrine as well. Do we believe our doctrine because we move in circles where people believe these things? Or do we look at the scripture and say, does this add up with scripture? That's what we got to do. It's not the, you know, when I'm reading, and I like doing it, I like reading different scholars' opinions on things. But you can't help many times thinking, these guys disagree because of the church they grew up in. Because they're like, well, this is me, I believe this, I grew up in this, all my friends are this, and they're good guys. And you can't approach doctrine that way. You got to say, what does the text say? And it's not just doctrine, it's how we live our lives as well. You know, and the message we preach, the gospel message we preach, are we being influenced by the world? Are we saying, look, the world doesn't like these things, so we won't mention them? Are we being a reed swayed about? In the workplace, what do we look like compared to other people? Are we swayed about by what other people say? Or on the street, do we stand out, or are we influenced by the crowd? If you stand out, then God can use you to draw a crowd. But if you're influenced by everything else around you, you're not going to be able to draw a crowd for God. And this is important because we want to bring as many people as possible to Jesus. And we want to do it God's way. And here we see God's way. Like God is going to drop Jesus on the whole planet. And he wants to announce it. And what does he do? He picks some guy who seems kind of crazy in the wilderness, wearing crazy clothes, who's completely different to everyone else, to draw a crowd. So this is God's strategy here. So I like looking at God's strategy and thinking, okay, maybe this is something that I can take on board myself, rather than all these new techniques that are coming out, which is, how can we be so like the world that people will come to church? But like Jesus said, would you go into the desert to see an everyday occurrence? Why would people come to church if it's just the same as the world? You know, I've seen pub churches and stuff, and it's like, why would you bother going to a pub, you know, with all these Christians there that sing a couple of songs, when you can just go to your local pub and not have to sing the songs and do whatever you want? You know, it's like, why? Why would you go somewhere else when it's exactly the same? If today is just the same as your bedroom or your living room, why would you bother coming? You know, there'd be no point. So we want to be different. And if you want to draw a crowd, don't be influenced by the crowd. If you want to draw a crowd for Jesus, don't be influenced by the crowd. Now, let's see the next thing that God doesn't do. Okay, he doesn't get someone who's influenced by the crowd. He doesn't do something that everyone's used to seeing. The next thing, verse 18, Jesus says, "What did you go out to see? A man dressed in fancy clothes? Look, those who wear fancy clothes are in the homes of kings." Again, this could be a reference to Herod. Herod's a king. Herod wears fancy clothes. And he's saying, did you go out into the desert to see someone wear fancy clothes? No, they live in king's houses. Herod Antipas had a home, he had a crib in Jericho, on the edge of the wilderness. So it looks like there might be a contrast going on there. Now, if you went to see him, you'd go to Jericho. You'd be on the edge of the desert. But you went into the desert to see John the Baptist. And what we see is that God puts a contrast between his enemies and his messengers. So this is really important here. There's a contrast between God's enemies and God's messengers. Clear distinction going on here. God knows what he's doing. He knows that different teams wear different shirts, yeah? If you watch a football game and everyone's wearing blue, You don't know what's going on. Not only that, the people playing don't know what's going on. That's probably happened to some of you who play football. You know, in the corner of your eye, you think he's your guy. You do a brilliant pass. You look up. No, it's the other team. They go and score a goal. This is the problem. If we look exactly the same as God's enemies, we can get confused. We can start playing for the wrong team. You know, this happened to me one time when I was doing outreach. I was doing an outreach in a street called Pusher Street, right, in Denmark, okay? It was Pusher street. It was a street of drug dealers, okay? And they had tables there with all their drugs on. And there was one guy I was trying to reach out to, made good friends with him, and one day he's like, someone's ripped me off, someone sold me bad stash, and I'm in trouble now, it's a lot of money. And for a split second, I'm like, thinking, let me pray for you. I'm saying, wait a minute, this guy's dealing drugs. It's like, well, I'm going to say, God, I pray that you get a good supply in the next few days. Miraculously give him loads of marijuana and everything, super skunk and, you know. No, but for a minute, I'm getting a bit confused, you know. In the corner of my eye, I go to make that pass and I think he's on my team, but he ain't, you know. And it happens when there isn't a clear distinction between God's messengers and God's enemies. But what happens today is sometimes Christians take off their shirts and they put on the shirt of the enemy. Or they take off their God shirt and they got their old shirt of the flesh. And they're like, yeah, now I can reach the lost. But it don't work like that. Check this out, yeah? Ephesians 4:22-24. Paul says, you were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off the old self. And the language there is like of taking clothes off. Take off the old kit, yeah? Which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires. To be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self. Again, the language of putting on clothes there. Put on the new strip, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. So, this is important, that we don't look just like God's enemies, but we look like God's messengers. He wants there to be a clear distinction. Take off the old, put on the new. Now, something else you should know about John the Baptist's clothes and the contrast between him and Herod, right, is that prophets weren't normally rich, okay? Prophets weren't normally rich, okay? And prophets did not follow the prosperity gospel, okay? They seem to have missed that somehow, okay? Looking at Old Testament, you ain't going to see it, all right? You ain't going to see it with these prophets. You might see a prophet going to a widow and saying, can you feed me? You know, but you're not going to see the prophet in all the bling. If you do, then he's the false prophet and he's supposed to be stoned, right? Okay, so these guys weren't into this, okay? And what happened was that during times of wickedness, when the system was corrupt, what did the prophets do? They went out into the desert, okay? And they went and hid, and they operated outside of the king's palace. They operated outside a normal society because they would get killed. You know, like, you know, we're told that Isaiah, I think it was Isaiah, was put in a tree trunk and sawn in half. Manasseh did that to him, the king. You know, so you know, prophets, the good prophets didn't have the bling, and they weren't in king's palaces like Jesus is saying. They didn't have the fancy clothes, okay? They had to operate outside of society when society was corrupt. And people knew that Herod's system was corrupt. And in Jesus' day, the temple system was corrupt as well. It's not just Jesus who said that. You know, you look through Jewish sources, you see other guys saying it's corrupt. Okay, so the whole system is corrupt. And so God's messenger operates outside of this system, and he doesn't look anything like it. So the point here is, let me read it out again. What did you go out to see? A man dressed in fancy clothes? Look, those who wear fancy clothes are in the homes of kings. And we see that John did not look like a corrupt rich man. He did not look like a corrupt rich man. And so God's strategy, when he's sending the guy to announce Jesus, his son who's coming to the earth, his strategy is, I won't send someone who looks like the corrupt system. I won't send someone who's a reed being blown about, who's pliable, who does what everyone says. And I also won't send someone who looks like the corrupt system. And this, I think, is really important, because how many times do you see someone join church and suddenly their clothes change and everything, and they're made to look like a politician? Do you know it don't just happen in London? It happens with people that reach out to the Indians. Yeah, I've heard of, if you read Britchko's book, when he went to reach out to the Motalone Indians, the first Indians he met were the Christians were dressed in suits. And the other Indians made fun of them and they said, we don't want to become Christians, because they associated it with being Western. And we see that in London. People from the street become Christian and suddenly they're wearing a nice suit. And it distresses me because we don't want people to look like politicians. That is not the image that we're portraying there. It's not God's strategy. Wasn't to make people look like politicians, not to make it look like a corrupt system. You know, the Roman Empire, when Constantine ran it, and it was Christian, supposedly, right? What happened was that other nations would not convert. You know why? Because they didn't like Rome. So the Goths wouldn't become Christians because they associated it, being a Christian, with being Roman. So the question is, do we want to portray the gospel in a way that associates being a Christian with being a politician or being a rich man in a suit? Doesn't appear to have been God's strategy when he sent John the Baptist. So I don't think we want to associate Jesus' name with $1,000 suit or £1,000 suit. I don't think we want to link him to materialism in the world or bling. And that goes for all different cultures, you know. It goes for the street as well. We don't want to link Jesus with street culture. He's above that. You know, so it's very important that we don't look too much like the street. There's excesses you can go in where people look at you and they just think that guy wears cool clothes. You don't want them thinking that. You want them thinking about Jesus. So we've all got to be careful about our balance and our approach with getting the gospel to people. Again, this is very different to what a lot of people are thinking about these days. A lot of people are thinking, no, let's look as cool as possible and then people will become Christians. But like with Jesus' thing, why did you bother going into the desert? Was it to see someone wearing nice clothes? No, you go in a king's palace to see that. People aren't going to come to church to see people in nice clothes because they can just go to a shopping centre to see people walk around in nice clothes. They're not going to come here. Right. So far we've seen that when God sent his messenger to announce Jesus, okay, one of the most strategic moments in history, okay, God sends someone who's not pliable, they're not flimsy, they don't follow what everyone else says, and he also picks someone who doesn't look like the rich people in the area, doesn't look like the corrupt people. Picks someone who completely stands out from the crowd. He chooses a prophet. And this is what he says next, verse 9. What did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. Now, people hadn't seen a prophet for a long time, yeah? You're looking at like about 400 years, yeah? So no one in the crowd there had seen a prophet before. So suddenly you hear there's this prophet in the desert. That's something worth going out to see. You're going to want to go and see that. So, and a prophet speaks forth God's word. So what we see here is God draws a crowd with his message. He draws a crowd with his message, and his message is through a guy who doesn't look like anything else out there. That's how God announces Jesus. And he brings something unusual, which is his voice, that hasn't been heard for about 400 years. That is the way God draws a crowd. And I think this is really important to us today because we want to bring God's message. But we've got to be careful that as we bring the message, we don't get influenced by the crowd. We're not like this reed shaken by the wind. We're not flimsy. We've got to make sure as well that when we bring the message, we don't associate it with money. We've got to be very careful about this. The message has got to be associated with God. So we're saying to people, this is God's message to you. That will draw a crowd. Now he says Jesus was more than a prophet, and the reason why is in the next verse, verse 10. This is the one about whom it is written, look, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you. Now this is talking about Malachi's prophecy that was made 400 years before, give or take. So if you look up Malachi 3 and 4 when you get home, you'll see about this prophecy. And it talked about God coming to the earth, and it talked about God bringing judgment. But it said before that happened, he was going to send Elijah, and Elijah was going to turn the people's hearts to God, which is good. You want that before judgment comes. You know, you want people to turn their hearts to God so that when the judgment comes, they don't suffer it. Now, Elijah, if you remember Old Testament stories, we don't really hear of him dying. We hear of him getting caught up to heaven. So people would think literally Elijah's going to come back. Later, well, we'll go into that maybe. No, we probably won't actually. But later, Jesus says about John the Baptist that he came in the spirit and power of Elijah. Now, different people debate whether he's Elijah. It doesn't seem John thought he was Elijah. Or whether he's operating in the spirit and power of Elijah, which is what Jesus said. So that seems a kind of safe bet to go with. But what we see, the main thing here is that someone's going to come. Elijah's going to come. John the Baptist comes before God brings the judgment. And if you remember last week, that's what John preached, that God's judgment is coming. Now, this makes him greater than anyone else before him. This is why Jesus says that he says more than a prophet. Because prophets talked about this, but he's the guy who's actually there right before Jesus comes. 400 years of silence from the prophets. And then this guy announces Jesus and he says, look, the Messiah's coming and he's going to bring judgment. So that's why he's greater than the other prophets. And what a privilege that is. I mean, you might think, man, I wish I could have had that privilege. That would be hardcore. To be John the Baptist. That would be amazing to be in that position. Now, wait a minute. You'll see. You've actually got something better than what he's got. But what I want to just show you here is that God used a person to prepare people for God's return and judgment. That's how God did it. He used a person to prepare people for God to come back and bring judgment. This is God's strategy. This is the way he works. And you might think, boy, that's a big responsibility. And that's what John had, but my responsibility might be a bit less. Maybe I don't have that. But check out the next verse. In verse 11 he says, I tell you the truth, among those born of women, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist. Yet the one who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he is. Now, I want to clear something up here. He's not saying, I don't think, that John isn't in the kingdom. I really don't think he's saying, listen, all the Old Testament guys, they're not going to be in the kingdom. But other guys will, and that's cool. It's better for them. Because earlier, Matthew chapter 8, verse 11, he says, I tell you, many will come from the east and west to share the banquet with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. So we see Old Testament saints in the kingdom of heaven, right? And John the Baptist technically is actually in the New Testament. But, you know, there's no reason to think John isn't going to be in the kingdom of heaven. He's bigging John up here. He's not putting him down. He's saying he's better than any of the other prophets. Why is he better? He's better because he has the privilege of announcing Jesus. Jesus is just about to come, right? In that sense, he's greater than the prophets. So if you're looking at that's how Jesus is determining greatness, then when he says that people later in the kingdom, even the least one, even us lot, are greater than John, he's not saying we're more spiritual, we're more holy. It looks like he's saying we have an even greater privilege because we can announce Jesus in an even more direct way than John did. We don't say, look out everyone, Jesus is coming. We say, hey everyone, Jesus came and he's in here. By his Holy Spirit, he's in here and he's coming back to judge one day. And that is a great privilege. That is a greater privilege than John the Baptist had. So have you ever read about John the Baptist and thought, wow, that is amazing? Just think, hang on a minute. We've got an even more amazing ministry that we can do today. Even more amazing than what John the Baptist had. That's pretty deep. Don't start putting your camel clothes on just yet. So what we see is that sharing the gospel is a privilege. Sharing the gospel is a privilege. And it's a privilege. Jesus seems to be saying it's a privilege. And I'm convinced that the devil is telling the church it's not a privilege, don't do it, it's bad. And that's really distressing. We need to see it is a privilege to share the gospel. There's joy in sharing the gospel. I don't know if you've ever found this, but you share the gospel with someone and afterwards you feel like you're like a foot taller and you just feel happier, you've got joy, you want to pray more. This is what God created us to do, and this is the great privilege we've got, sharing the gospel. But the question is, do you want to take that privilege? Do you want to take that privilege today, or do you want to ignore it? Or do you want to be flimsy and just say, you know what, no, I don't want to offend people at work. I don't want to offend people on the street, people in my family. I just want to go with the flow, want to make people happy. Let's change our church service so that it's really nice for non-Christians to come in and they're really friendly when they come. We never say anything about the gospel. Let's just have a good youth group with PlayStations and everything, and everyone will be happy. That's what some people are doing. Other people are acting like rich people, and they're saying what we're going to do is we're going to make the gospel look like the same as getting rich. That's much easier than telling people they need to repent and they go to hell. We tell them, you come to Jesus, you get rich, loads of money. And that's what they're doing. Now, there's no privilege in doing that whatsoever. No privilege. We'll look at a Bible verse in a minute which will show you how you don't want to be any part of that. But if you do want this task, this great privilege of announcing Jesus, then what you should do is look at the life of John the Baptist, see him as one of your heroes, and look at Jesus and his life and ministry and see him as your hero, definitely, and look at their lives and learn from them. And let's have a look here. Jesus explains what his ministry and what John's ministry is like. In verse 12, Net Bible translates it this way, which I don't agree with, but I read it out. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has suffered violence and forceful people lay hold of it. I prefer the NIV on this one, so let's go there. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has been forcefully advancing and forceful men lay hold of it. Now, there's much debate about this verse, yeah? And if you disagree with me, that's cool, okay? But I can argue this translation here from the context, and I can also argue it from the Greek. Other people can probably use the Greek to argue against it as well, but I think the context is the strongest argument about this one. Okay, context, right? There's a new era here. He's just talked about John the Baptist, talked about the prophets before him. They prophesied up to this point. Jesus is here now, okay? You got a new era. John announced it. Jesus brought it. So to me, the context is suggesting the kingdom of heaven now, during the days of John the Baptist, the kingdom of heaven has been advancing forcefully. After all these years of prophecy, all these years of expectation, now, boom, it's coming. And it's advancing. It is getting bigger. But at the same time, the context also suggests that it's getting attacked by forceful men. Because what happened to John the Baptist? He's in prison. And he's going to get beheaded. So, and what happens to Jesus later? Gets crucified. So it appears in the context that what you've got going on is, yeah, the kingdom's advancing. And it started with the ministry of John the Baptist announcing Jesus. And Jesus came, brought the kingdom with him. But it's advancing. But at the same time, it's also getting attacked by forceful people. Which explains John's situation. Because the crowd still be like, yeah, but Jesus, that's cool what you said last week. When I say last week, we're talking about our church sermon, you know. But it's like, it's cool what you said about the blind see and all that. But John is still in prison. And here you've got the explanation. Yeah, the kingdom's advancing, but it's also being plundered by violent men at the same time. People like Herod. And I really think in this whole passage here, Jesus refers to Herod a few times. You've already heard me explain that. So this also ties in well with Matthew 17, verse 12, where he says, and I tell you that Elijah has already come. Talking about John the Baptist again. Yet they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they wanted. In the same way the Son of Man will suffer at their hands. So later you got Jesus saying the same kind of thing. You know, that they are gonna do nasty things to the people in the kingdom and the people who are advancing the kingdom. So what I think it's showing here is that this is how the kingdom grows. The kingdom is present and it's growing, but it's being attacked as well. It's present and it's growing, but it's being attacked as well. Now, from the Greek, I'll do this as quickly as possible. You've got two words there, yeah? Forcefully advancing, and you've got forceful men. Okay? Very similar words because they're cognates. In other words, one is a noun, and the other is a verb, but they both sound and look the same. So what you've got going on here is, easiest to look at the second one first. Forceful men. The Greek word there, it's very hard to apply that in a positive way. Because from what we know of that word, it's used of bad people like bandits, robbers, plunderers, okay? Very hard to see how Jesus would here be using that in a positive way, especially because we don't really see Jesus teaching that you forcefully get into the kingdom, although I know it preaches well. And I wish in my study I had come to that conclusion, because I could have preached a banging sermon on it. But, you know, when you look at where this word's used in other places, you've got bad people, robbers, plunderers, okay? So it looks like the second bit is saying bad people are attacking the kingdom, trying to rob its resources, trying to rob John the Baptist, trying to rob Jesus. And we see this happen all over the world. This is going on. But then you got the first one. It's like, well, does that mean the kingdom of heaven is forcefully robbing people? Well, here you've got whether this is a passive or a middle deponent. Now, I only say that for the benefit of anyone who knows what those means. Then they'll be like, I see where he's going with this. If you don't know what it means, don't worry. But I would argue that it's more likely to be a middle deponent, and it's not saying that the kingdom is being attacked. One of the reasons is it seems redundant to say the kingdom of heaven is being attacked and people are attacking it. To me, that seems redundant. Why would he say it twice? But if he's doing a clever thing here where he's using this word another way and he's saying the kingdom is forcefully going forwards and people are forcefully attacking it, that to me makes more sense with the context. That technically is called anticlasis, where you're using two words but with different ways in the same sentence. That's my reasoning for it. I don't mind if anyone agrees at all. Makes sense to me. Lots of people disagree, lots of people would agree. I stick with the NIV. And I didn't plan that to rhyme, by the way, but it's just nice the way it turned out. Right, okay, so the point here, the reason why this is important is for us to be realistic about the kingdom. We've got to be realistic about the kingdom. The kingdom is growing, but at the same time, John was imprisoned and beheaded. Jesus was beaten and crucified. Christians are imprisoned and beheaded and crucified. In Sudan, Christians are crucified. Children are crucified. Don't let anyone tell you this prosperity nonsense. Go to Sudan, tell that to little kids who are being crucified for being Christians, and take their place. It's disgusting. But Jesus warned us of this. He said the kingdom is forcefully advancing, but it's also being attacked. And that helps us understand why we've got brothers and sisters around the world being killed for their faith. We don't experience it here, but it's happening in the world. It's nasty. The application is, if you want to tell people about Jesus, don't expect to be popular. Don't expect to be popular. Don't expect to be living it up in rich houses. And don't expect to be on Oprah as the most popular, influential person in the world. Because it ain't going to happen. It didn't happen with John. It didn't happen with Jesus. It ain't going to happen with us. If it does, something's wrong. If we find ourselves with the corrupt system, something is seriously wrong here. Now, just to support the idea that the first part of this verse means the kingdom's forcefully advancing, check out the next verse, verse 13. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John appeared. So you see it starts with for, like because, like this is an explanation. All the prophets and the law, in other words, the Old Testament prophesied until John appeared. So he's showing these led up to this and now, boom, it's here. That's the way I see it. Now the kingdom starts and advances. It's growing. Jesus has broken in. He's destroying the devil's works. The blind can see, the lame can walk, and people now, he's given them the opportunity to repent before his judgment comes, which John the Baptist obviously thought was coming sooner, but Jesus is, that's coming later. But Jesus still tells people to repent. He still tells them about judgment, which we'll see in a minute. So, then he says in verse 14, and if you are willing to accept it, he is Elijah who is to come. Now again, this is because of Malachi. We just go quickly to one of the verses, Malachi 4, verse 5 to 6. See, I will send you the prophet Elijah before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. Okay, so he's telling them there's going to be a dreadful day of the Lord, but before then I'll send you Elijah, which we know now as John the Baptist. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, or else I will come and strike the land with a curse. So what you see here is Elijah here is a good guy. Yeah? I mean, look what he's doing for these guys. He turned their hearts. Otherwise, God's going to come and strike the land with a curse. So Elijah here is a good guy. The Jews weren't thinking, oh, Elijah's a bad guy, we don't want him to come. They were thinking, yes, we want him to come. And John the Baptist came and he was a good guy because he warned people about this judgment. He came and said, look, the judgment is coming. God's going to curse the land. So repent. Now, the point here is that good guys warn of judgment. Good guys warn of judgment. Don't forget that, yeah? Because everyone at the moment is trying to persuade Christians that we shouldn't talk about judgment. But if you're ever on a bus and you see some dude with a backpack plugging in wires and turning knobs, you know, then you got to shout out, there's a bomb on here, get off. And you'll be a hero, you'll be a good guy. And in the same way, we need to tell people out there, God's judgment is coming one day. But you can repent and escape that. And you can meet the King of Kings and Lord of Lords and worship him every day. And that's the best thing you can ever do. And it's the only thing that's worth doing. If we do this, we're good guys, even though people are trying to persuade us we shouldn't do this. So don't get influenced by the crowd. Don't let the crowd tell you to not use the J word, judgment word, or Jesus word, the R word, repentance, yeah, the C word, condemnation. Don't let people influence you to not use these words. Don't worry about, you know, people say, oh, but don't say judgment. People don't like judgment. That's the point. They're not supposed to like judgment. If people come in here and I say I'm not going to say judgment so that, you know, they're comfortable, then I'm doing a disservice to God, because God designed the whole system, didn't he? And he's like, I'm going to judge. And I'm going to tell you about judgment, because I tell you about judgment and you've got an opportunity to repent. It's supposed to be bad. Judgment is bad. Hell is bad. What kind of system would we have in this country if prisons were better than penthouses? Everyone would be like, I don't care about going to prison, sounds good. So yeah, it's cool if people are uncomfortable with judgment. We want that. We don't want to be unbiblical and try and make it nicer than it really is. So let's not be reeds swayed about by the wind. And at the same time, the other thing, don't get tricked into telling people the gospel is about being rich. Really important, we don't do that, okay? Check this out, okay? 1 Timothy 6:5, this was a verse I promised you. Talks about people corrupted in their minds and deprived of the truth, who suppose that godliness is a way of making a profit. Even in Timothy's day, people thought that being a Christian was a way to get money. 2,000 years later, people think being a Christian is a way to make money. And it's not. And you see in the Bible, false teachers mentioned, and it talks about the love of money, you know, so it's like we don't want to be anywhere near that, nowhere near that. Let's look at John the Baptist, let's look at Jesus and say, these guys we will emulate. We will copy what they're doing. And we're not going to get on the whole money tip telling people if you become a Christian, you get rich. Because you could tell that to Jesus and he'd say, you know, foxes have holes, birds have nests, whatever it was he said, and he's like, but I haven't got anywhere to lay my head. I haven't got a home, I haven't got a crib. I haven't got a bimmer. You know, he's like, I'm not rich. Now, check this out. Following on from this, because, well, no, I don't want to finish that point yet. Remember, God is not a means of getting rich. He's someone to worship. He is the Almighty God. We should worship him, not look to him to try and make money out of him. He is God. And following on from that, Jesus says in verse 15, the one who has ears had better listen. That's the way the Net Bible drops it, and I like it. You're probably used to hearing it, the one who has ears here, like. I like the way they've done it. The one who has ears had better listen. They argue that, you know, it's stronger than just hear. You know, it's like, you better listen. Now notice, Jesus here puts the onus on the crowd, not on the messenger. He's saying to the crowd, you lot had better listen. The onus is on you. He's saying, I'm God. I was announced by John the Baptist. Both of us were prophesied. Judgment's going to come. You better listen. It's true. You've got enough evidence here to see this. Now, he warns them because they're not listening. And it's not because of Jesus' style. And it's not because of John's style. It's not because of that at all. It's just because they won't accept God. This is really important. Look what he says in verse 16. To what shall I compare this generation? They are like children sitting in the marketplaces who call out to one another. We played the flute for you, yet you did not dance. We wailed in mourning, yet you did not weep. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they said, he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look at him, he's a glutton and a drunk, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. Now it appears here Jesus is talking about a game the kids would play in the street. You know, and like these kids are saying, look, we played the wedding game, possibly, you know. We played a flute like we're at a wedding, and you lot wouldn't dance. And then we're like, okay, let's play the funeral game. You know, we sang a sad song. We mourned. But you didn't mourn either. You know, and the way they mourn did involve music. You had professional mourners and whatnot. You guys all know about that. And they're like, but you guys wouldn't join in the game. It would be a bit like today saying to someone, look, I went to the video shop and I got 2 DVDs. I didn't know what you want. I got a comedy and you didn't want to watch that. And then I got a drama and you wouldn't watch that either. Whatever I get, you're not going to watch. What's your problem? It's that kind of thing going on. Saying to your kid, I bought you a Nintendo 360, I bought you a Nintendo Wii, bought you a PlayStation 3, and you won't play any of them. What's your problem? So, you know, you would have thought, well, they got it covered. The way John does his ministry, the way Jesus does his ministry, going in people's houses, you would have thought, well, someone's going to respond because they've got all these different approaches. But Jesus is saying, nah, they don't respond. That's the way they are. They will reject the gospel message. Now, he's explaining, Jesus is admitting here that him and John have got different approaches. But he's not saying they got a different message. You know, they both have the same message. Remember this one, we're keeping this the same, the message. But this hand with the approaches can change. And they got different approaches. John is dressed like a nutter in the desert, shouting, okay? Now, he's like the guy with the megaphone, you know, out in the street shouting. And people say, oh, no one's ever going to get saved with him doing that. He needs to change his approach. But check it out. Jesus doesn't say John needs to fix up and change his approach. He doesn't say that. He says, do that approach, you don't listen. Then you've got the Jesus approach, you know, where Jesus, he still preaches repentance. He still preaches he's the way to the Father. But what he does is he's going around people's houses. He's right there in their houses. He's going to the people. And yet, then people say, well, you know what? You're just a drunk. Now, we know that Jesus wasn't a drunk. We know that he was without sin, so he never got drunk. Okay, so when people quote this to justify getting drunk in the pubs, it don't work, yeah? Because he was a man without sin. So, but that's what they accused him of. They had their excuse. And then with John, who you could never accuse of getting drunk, because how'd you get drunk on locusts and honey? Like, you know, it's not possible. You know, so, but John, they say, he has a demon. So Jesus is saying, whatever we do, you've got an excuse. You've got a reason why you won't get saved. So, do you see the point he's making?